I'm firmly in that IT pro camp, and I love infrastructure and everything around that. I've made the transition from being an on-prem engineer into a cloud engineer, and I enjoy helping others on that journey. I'm also the founder of the Glasgow Azure user group, and due to current circumstances, we're going to be holding a virtual event this month. So if you want to sign up for that, please do have a look out for us. Now, I work in a globally distributed team, and we cover, I think it's about 7 or 8 different time zones between us all. And I'm the blue dot in the middle of the map because I'm based in Scotland. And Scotland is the home of amazing animals like the Highland cow, or Highland coo, as we say. We are also home of fantastic whisky. It's a bit early in the morning for some whisky, but my favourite is the Balvenie Double Wood 17-year-old. Scotland is also famous for some weird and wonderful phrases, and I want to just take you through some of those before we start this morning. So you might hear people in Scotland say, keep the heat, and that means stay calm and don't get upset. Hod your wisht is also something that you hear quite a bit. My mum says it to me all the time, and it really means be quiet. I'm pure done in is usually what I say we will be at the end of conferences, but as we're not running around hallways and trying to find rooms, we're not that today. But I'm pure and done in means I'm tired. We've also got Bonnie, so if you ever hear people say Bonnie Scotland, what they actually mean is beautiful Scotland. Now, instead of saying yes, you'll hear Scottish people saying aye, and instead of no, you'll hear Scottish people saying no. We also say we instead of saying small, and you might hear me say this during the session, but in Scotland we sometimes refer to physical servers as tin. So yeah, that's just a bit of a Scottish lesson for you before we start the session. But as I said, the session is about talking about doing that transformation journey from on-prem into the cloud. And I've talked to customers a whole bunch around what that means for them. And a lot of my customers are doing it for a variety of reasons. Now, one of the common ones that I've talked to customers about is data center contracts expiring. So their data center lease is running out and they're looking for a new way of going forward. So they're trying to evaluate the cloud. Now, I've also had people come to me and I had one customer say that the government were building a brand new train track through their data centre, so they had to get out to accommodate that train track coming through the data centre. So there's all sorts of weird and wonderful reasons for migrating away from on-prem into the cloud. But regardless of what your reason is, the stages are really all the same. And I say those stages are discovery and assessment, migrate, optimise and secure and manage. Now, these stages aren't just about technology, they're also about the people and the processes behind all of that. So let's dive in and take a look at what these 4 sections are and how Azure Migrate can help you. So as I said, the first session or first stage is really that discovery stage. Now, what I get asked a lot is, should I do a discovery before I set out my migration strategy, or should I set out my migration strategy before doing a discovery? And for me, I always say you need to do that discovery before you do your migration strategy. The discovery really helps you understand and fully appreciate what's in your environment, and then you can start to actually strategize about how you're going to be moving forward in the cloud. Because regardless of how well we know an environment or how well we think we document our environments, there's always going to be something that you uncover that you didn't know. I think all of my customers, once they've done a discovery, they've found some bit of kit, some bit of tin, or some kind of process that they didn't realise existed that actually fundamentally changes how they're going to move forward and affects that migration strategy. So I definitely say do the discovery, do the audit, find out everything you can about your environment before you even start to look at how you migrate to the cloud. Now, the discovery phase isn't always just about technology. It's also about, like I said, speaking to the people and finding out about the processes behind that. Now, often in the IT department, we are the ones that are responsible for looking after the systems and making sure that they run efficiently and are up for everybody. But what we miss is the fact that we're not using those products day in, day out. And sometimes our department heads or our business stakeholders can be a bit sneaky, and they can go ahead and purchase IT systems without telling us, right? So I've worked for companies where, you know, the HR department have went off and they have purchased a system, not told IT until they got the system and they said, can you install that? So please speak to your stakeholders in your business and understand what their processes are and understand where they are in their life cycle of the applications that they use. Now, always have a look at your staff training. Moving to the cloud is a big step forward for everybody, and not everybody is maybe self-learning at home or had the opportunity to use the cloud before now. So make sure you're aware of who needs training and what training that they need so that they can be efficient going forward and still help you once you move your workloads into the cloud. Now, I put together a small checklist that can get you started on that discovery journey and help you find the information that you need to find. So definitely check that out and bookmark that link. It is open source, it is held on GitHub. So if you want to contribute it, if you want to add to it, I highly encourage everybody to do that. Now, as I said, we have a product at Microsoft called Azure Migrate, and I want to talk to you about how Azure Migrate can help you with that discovery journey. Now, Azure Migrate has been around for several years now. We launched it back in September 2017, and ever since then, we've really grown the product into something that hopefully our customers are happy with. We've taken on a lot of feedback from our customers, and we've grown the product massively since then. And today it now is referenced as the hub for your data center migration. And I fully believe that. I don't feel it's just a marketing term. The product does cover off a lot of scenarios that I see with customers. We can do the scenarios around your virtual machines, your databases, your virtual desktops, your web apps, your raw data. We can cover all of that for you. We have the capabilities to discover, assess, and actually migrate those workloads from on-prem into the cloud and help you on that journey. But it's not just our own products and our own toolings that we have now. We have actually spoke to our third parties, ISVs, and we've integrated those tools and their tools into our Azure portal, which really means, and I know we hear this phrase a lot, but it's that one-stop shop for you to actually go through your journey. So you can use the Azure portal to, you know, look at your workloads and manage your workloads, and you can also use the Azure portal to understand how you can move forward with the rest of the workloads that are still on-prem. So I want to show you a little demo of how you can use Azure Migrate and do that discovery and what happens once you've got that discovery data in the Azure portal. So here we are in the Azure portal, and this is the Azure Migrate blade, and as you can see we have a lot of information and a lot of different bits that we can pick on. Like I said, we've got different sections that can deal with your servers, your databases, your web apps, and even your raw data with Databox. So what we want to do is have a look at servers. So we've set it up to discover servers within our environment. And as you can see, we've got over 30,000 servers that we've discovered. Now what you'll see here is some raw data, some really high level data about your environment, the name of the server, the IP address, you know, memory, storage, operating system. And that's just the high level data that it started to discover within your environment. What we can actually have a look at is things like the applications that it's discovered on the servers. We can change the column views as well here within the Azure Blade and have a look at different fields as well. But as I said, you can start to look at the applications that it's discovered. On this server, we've got applications where it said that the server has SQL installed and it has SharePoint installed. So if we didn't know what this server was, we could start to summarise that it was maybe a SharePoint server and we had to treat it as such. But it's not just the applications that we've got from this discovery, we've also got the roles and features that are installed on this server. So again, if we didn't know what this server was, we could quickly summarise from what roles and features were installed in it what its job was within our environment. Now that we have that discovery data, what we want to do is create an assessment that tells us whether these workloads are actually appropriate and can be supported within Azure, and what our bosses all want to know, how much it would actually cost if we were to move the workloads into Azure. Now, we've created a bunch of assessments already, and what we're going to do is look at one that's been created for our payroll app. So there's 9 servers that we think in our environment that make up our payroll app. And we can see here from this report that we've got our Azure readiness, so whether the workloads are supported in Azure, and we've got a monthly breakdown of our costs. Now, this report here is drillable and you can action it and you can have a look at it, but if you wanted, you could actually export it as an Excel spreadsheet and look at it that way. But as I said, you can interact with this report here, and as you can see, we've got 2 servers that are saying that they might not be supported or might be ready within to be supported within Azure. And if we drill into that, what we can see here is information about those 9 servers and those 2 troublesome ones. We've got recommendations around the Azure size we can use to migrate that workload into Azure as, and we've got what tool we could potentially use. Now, these 2 servers are saying they're conditionally supported or conditionally might not be supported within Azure, because all we've discovered is the operating system level, the high level version of that operating system, and it's a Linux version, and then we've got a CentOS version. We've not been able to drill down in the discovery tool what version that actually is. So there is some human interaction here that you need to go and do. So you need to go and have a look at the version these servers have, and then double check with the Azure documentation to check that it's supported. Now, 9 times out of 10, when I see these reports within customer environments, they're nothing to worry about. They are just that double checking. They are just a point so that you can double check and make sure that the environment is supported within Azure. They're not really, I know it's a warning triangle, obviously it's quite scary, but in this case, it is just a double check for you to go and double check our documentation and where it is at this present stage. So now that we've had a look at the servers, what we want to have a look at is the cost of the servers as well, and we can drill into that in a monthly cost, and we can have a look at what's happening within that environment. So you have that information, you have that high level discovery information for you there. So now that you've got that high level discovery information, we're wanting to start to do that migrate stage. And what you might have seen in the past before is this slide that talks about the 5 Rs and how you can migrate your workloads into the cloud. I tell customers not to get too hung up on this, because what I've seen with some customers is they focus solely on getting into, something like the replace stage, where everything is a SaaS platform, a software as a service. And not all their workloads fit into that, and they become unstuck and they become set in this mindset where the cloud doesn't work for them, and they end up having to revert everything back. And that's because they've kind of approached it wrong, to be honest. Regardless of what your workloads are, if you're moving to the cloud and how you move to the cloud, it doesn't really matter, to be honest. Like I said, that customer I had with the train track coming right through their data center, they ended up moving everything just as virtual machines. That was a fully rehosted migration plan that they went through, and that was because of their time scale. They didn't have the time to redesign everything, to change everything into a PaaS solution or a SaaS solution. They didn't have that luxury of time. So everything went from their data center as a virtual machine into Azure as a virtual machine. They're now on that road to changing that strategy. And yes, it's an extra step, but it met their initial goal. They got out of their data center in time and saved their workloads, etc. So please don't get hung up on what R that you migrate away from your on-prem environment from. It really doesn't matter. It's about fitting the right solution for your goals and your company. And this is where the migration stage is really twofold. So your migration stage is, first of all, that strategy, finding out what workloads are moving into the cloud and how they're moving into the cloud. And then it's actually migrating them and actually implementing that. And again, it's not going to happen all at once. So a lot of customers can't just move in, you know, a weekend time slot. They have to do it over several weekends, several months. But whatever that migration strategy is for your organisation, just be comfortable and confident with what you're doing, and it'll be fine. Also, at the migration stage, you really need to be starting to think about how you're going to deal with your disaster recovery, how you're going to deal with backups, how you're going to deal with monitoring, and how you're going to deal with managing your workloads in the cloud and potentially still workloads on-prem as well. If you're going for that hybrid model, do the existing tools you have enable you to still monitor and manage your workloads in the cloud, or do you need to start looking at other products during this time? Now, some companies don't instantly implement DR backup monitoring when they move to the cloud, and they do that later on. But you know, regardless of when you implement it, you really need to start thinking about what you're doing going forward. Also, one thing to do at this stage is not move your most critical app. First of all, I always tell customers to start with something that's fairly simple, fairly innocuous to your company. And if something goes wrong when you do migrate it, you're not getting a phone call from your boss's boss shouting at you because something major has went down and the company's share price is being affected. If you pick a simple application, a simple workload, you know, even if it's just an internal tool for your IT department, you get the chance to learn without someone shouting at you. You know, even if it's just picking that SharePoint web server that hosts your restaurant canteen menu for the day, that's fine. Learn with each migration, and as you go along, you know, build up the more complex and more critical applications and move them into Azure that way. Now, as I said, Azure Migrate can actually help you with this stage as well. We can move workloads from on-prem, whether they be Hyper-V, whether they be VMware, whether they be physical, into the Azure. We can also help you move those workloads you may have within AWS or GCP and move them into Azure as well. So we have all those bases covered. Now, we have the ability for VMware migrations to be agentless, so that helps you a little bit with not having to install an agent on every bit of your servers. And we can also have this test before you migrate. So we have the ability to actually test once you've replicated the virtual machines into Azure, what happens when you spin them up in Azure. And that gives you this great playground to actually test and understand your processes before you move forward. And that's really key and critical because, again, it helps you understand the process, but it also helps you understand whether you need to do some certain things. So do you need to manually start up a service? Do you need to uninstall some software on that virtual machine now that it's not on-prem? Do you need to install some software now that it's in Azure? And you can list out all of those stages and document them in a kind of change procedure. And that way you're doing that without touching your production environment. You're giving yourself some hands-on learning and you're being proactive in terms of mitigating any data loss, any issues, and making sure that the migration is as seamless for your company as possible. Now, one question I often get asked and I often see on social media is around Azure Site Recovery versus Azure Migrate. And for a long time at Microsoft, we recommended that Azure Site Recovery, or ASR, was the tool that you use to migrate your workloads from on-prem into Azure. We've changed that mindset now. As we've developed and matured Azure Migrate, we now recommend that that's the tool that you use for your migration going forward. Azure Site Recovery, ASR, is our disaster recovery tool. That's a tool you should be using to plan your disaster recovery. If something goes wrong, you should have ASR set up so that you can move things into that secondary zone and fail over and do all of those things. Azure Migrate is great for doing the discovery, the migration of your workloads, and that's a tool you should really be picking going forward now. That's where our investment are, that's where our R&D is going for migrations, and so that is definitely the tool you should be picking. So I want to show you a little demo of Azure Migrate. I have sped this up, it is a video, because the process of migrating your workloads from on-prem does take a while. It can take several hours or maybe even days, depending on how many servers and how much data you're actually replicating up into Azure. So yeah, we have sped this video up just for the purposes of today's session. So here we are in the Azure portal, and we have discovered our servers and assessed them. Now we want to start that replication. So what we want to do is we have to set up the tool that does the replication. Now, our demo environment is a Hyper-V environment, so all the virtual machines are hosted on a Hyper-V server. So we tell Azure Migrate and the server migration tool all of that details, and we tell it where we want to replicate our virtual machines into. So in this instance, we are going to the East US Azure zone. So the Azure Migrate tool comes back and tells us that we need to install a bit of software onto our Hyper-V host servers. So this bit of software goes on the Hyper-V host server. And it really is just a kind of next setup for this bit of software. We do have to input a small text file that we download from the Azure Migrate portal, and then we set that up. As you can see, we have sped that up because this software, although it's quite a simple install, does take a little bit of time to set up in the background. But now that that has been set up, what we can now do is have to go back into the portal and we finalise that kind of link. And that just links our on-prem server with our Azure Migrate project, and make sure that there's a link there and it's secure and set up for us to replicate our servers. So what we'll find now is once we've set that up, it'll say that we've got 4 servers on-prem, and that's correct. On this Hyper-V host, we do have 4 servers virtually within it. So if we click on it, we can see those 4 servers. We've got the 3 that we knew about, and we've also got the Azure Migrate appliance we used earlier on for assessment. What we want to do is start to replicate those virtual machines. So we get a wizard now to talk us through it. We are asked a bunch of questions around whether we want to migrate these virtual machines in terms of sizing and assessment. Now, during our assessment earlier on, our tooling made some assumptions around sizing for those virtual machines on-prem. Here we have the option to migrate them either with those recommendations from the report, or we can move them as is. So we don't need to change anything, or we can change anything. In this example, we are going to apply the assessment details from our server assessment. So we just fill in that, we tell it what assessment that we want and what group. Now we're asked what virtual machines we're actually looking to replicate. So we pick the 3 that we want to replicate from on-prem up into Azure. Here we're asked about our target settings, and this is about what's happening within Azure. So we're asked about the subscription that we want to use, we're asked about the resource group, we're asked about a storage account and a virtual networking subnet. Now, you should have set up all of this ahead of time. This isn't something that you set up during replication. We call this at Microsoft a landing zone, or a minimum viable product within Azure. And that's basically just the bare bones of what you need to host your workloads within Azure. So we've set all of this up already. We've got a resource group, we've got our storage account, and we've got our virtual network set up with what we need. And again, most of that information actually comes from what we discovered earlier on about our environment. So the subnet looks a bit like what we have on-prem, etc., to keep everything in sync. You can also at this point apply the licensing and use hybrid benefit licensing. Now, this is the stage where we can confirm what size of virtual machine we're going to use and what type of virtual machine we're actually hosting. As I said, the assessment report has given us Azure virtual machine size based on its finding. Here we can tweak that if we don't think it's right, or if we want to change that. We also make sure that we confirm what operating system version is running on our virtual machines, just so that the Azure portal and Azure Migrate knows what's happening with those virtual machines when we migrate them. We also have the option if we wanted to set an availability set up here for these virtual machines when we migrate them. This stage allows us to confirm whether we want our disks replicated and how many disks. So you might have disks you don't want to replicate from your on-prem virtual machines, but we're just going to go with all the defaults. Now, the replication, as I said, is probably the stage that takes a while. It might take days or a couple of hours, depending on how fast your internet speed is up into Azure, or depending on how much change is happening within your servers or the size of your servers. So yeah, this is something that you definitely need to plan for and definitely need to understand, because it can saturate your internet pipe up into Azure, or it could actually saturate your entire company's internet pipe. So it's definitely a phase you have to plan for and understand how you treat it. Now that we have all our virtual machines replicated up into Azure and they're all healthy and fine, what we want to do is do that test migration. We want to test what's going to happen when we actually replicate them up into Azure. So to do that, we use the test migration stage. Now, we have to manually kick off the replication, the test migration for each of those servers, but there's a handy little button within each of the servers, and it takes us to some details around what virtual network we want to move these virtual machines into. So we pick that virtual network for each of the servers, and we have to go through each server manually. So that's the test migration kicked off for each of our 3 servers, and after a few minutes, what we'll be able to see is these virtual machines within Azure and spun up. So if we head over to our resource group, what we'll be able to see here is these virtual machines. And as you can see, the virtual machines are called IIS-test. So everything with a dash test is our test machines. And that's just so that they aren't hitting our production network. They aren't clashing with our already existing name within our environment. We have them completely separate. Now, what these virtual machines are just virtual machines. You can connect into them, you can RDP into them, you can connect in and check what's happening with them. So like I said, you can check if you need to manually start services or stop services, if you need to uninstall software, if you need to install software, you can do some test plans. You can interact with these just like any other virtual machine. They're there for testing. It literally is for you to have a look at and make sure that the replication from on-prem into Azure has happened like you thought it was going to. Now that we've tested everything and we are happy with how these virtual machines have replicated, what we want to do is clean up those test resources, because as the resources are switched on, we are paying for the compute of them. So what we definitely don't want to do is leave these virtual machines, these test ones, running and paying for them while we're doing our migration. So we can do a clean up test migration against each of these virtual machines, and Azure will just go through and delete those delete the IP addresses, etc., that were created during the test migration. And this is definitely a key stage because you don't want to be leaving behind anything that you're paying for in the long term. But now that we're happy, we've got our virtual machines replicated, we've tested them and everything's okay, what we actually want to do is the live migration. Now we can go through and migrate all of these virtual machines at the same time, so we can kick off the plan and Azure will take care of migrating them and flipping them over into Azure for us. Now there's a box at the top here that says, do you want to shut down the on-prem virtual machines while you migrate, or do you want to leave them on? Now, some applications you'll need to switch off the on-prem ones so that data isn't going to on-prem, maybe getting lost while we do that replication and the cut over into Azure itself, or some might not need shut down. In this case, as we're only migrating something, an internal tool, we don't care really about any data loss at this time, but that's definitely something to utilise for some of your more mission critical applications and workloads. Now Azure is starting to flip all 3 of those servers across for us, and we can hopefully in a few minutes see them live within the Azure portal. And once that's done, we just go in to the resource group that we said that we're going to migrate into. And here we can actually see these virtual machines. And you see now that they're not got that dash test at the end. They're migrated across as live production workloads. So that's now our live virtual machines. We now have to go back on-prem and switch them off and tidy them up, delete them or pack them away, depending on what they are. But they virtual machines have now been replicated, test migrated, and actually migrated up to Azure using Azure Migrate. So now that we have everything in Azure and we are running and we're running with our workloads in Azure, we need to start thinking about the long term of our workloads in Azure. And this is where the optimization stage comes into play. We need to start thinking about this as a business as usual activity. And the optimize stage is kind of twofold. It's starting to track your costs and also starting to understand how you can operationally be better within Azure. Now, the first one, the cost, is maybe an obvious one. We are no longer paying for IT services the same way that we did when we were on-prem. On-prem, you were probably used to spending tens of thousands of pounds on hardware, sometime, once every 3 or 4 years, and then kind of forgetting about the costs around all of that. Within Azure, we are paying for things per minute, per hour, per day, depending on what that service is. So we need to be tracking that. We need to be understanding that we're actually using our budget effectively and not overspending and wasting our money on other things that are running that we no longer need. So you definitely have to track. You definitely have to look at these costs and think about them. I don't tell people to do it all the time. So it's not a business as usual activity you'll be doing once a week, maybe not even once a month. I think most of the customers I talk to do it every 3 months or every quarter, depending on their business works. And that's because if they leave it for such a long period of time, they're actually getting a good solid amount of data to base their optimization around. So what you don't want to do is take, say, a week's view of what your virtual machines within Azure are doing and say, oh, they're all oversized, I need to downsize them. So you downsize them to save some costs, and then next week someone tries to run a once-off workload within one of those virtual machines, and they are constrained by the smaller virtual machine size. So if you're taking a view over a month or 3 months, what happens is you have a good chunk of data. So you're capturing those once-off tasks that all organisations have that need large compute or large storage or whatever it may be. So yeah, optimization is definitely something you should be looking at as a business as usual activity. But like I said, it isn't something you should be worrying about every week. There are lots and lots of tools out there to use in order to track your costs. I do recommend our customers have a look at Azure Cost Management, which is the built-in tool for Azure. I recommend it, first of all, not just because I'm a Microsoft employee, but because it's a free tool and it's turned on by default. So the minute you start putting workloads within Azure, it starts to collect costs and start to trend analysis, all of that for you. And as I said, it's a free tool, so give it a try, see what it does. If you don't like it, you have an understanding of what you don't like about that tool, so you can then go and hunt for a third-party one. Now, the fourth stage, and arguably a stage you probably should be doing all the time, is secure and manage. Now, we talk about secure and manage because when you move to the cloud, there's a change in responsibility and there's a shared responsibility about how your workloads are managed and operated. So previously on-prem, you were probably used to looking after everything in your data center, from making sure that the fence was secure at your data center, all the way into looking at making sure that the data wasn't accessible by a rogue operator. That's now changed if you're utilising the cloud, and you have this joint responsibility. Now, Microsoft will take care of all that physical security. They'll look after the fences for your data centre. They'll make sure that the hardware is up to date and operating peak efficiently. Whereas you're now looking at things like the data. Who has access? What ports are open? Are your workloads running efficiently, etc.? And you have to focus on that. And I say to customers, to be honest, it's a great leap for some people, because I have colleagues and peers who look after physical data centres, and part of their job is the IT infrastructure. But it's also things like making sure that the toilet within the data centre has enough toilet roll. So moving their workloads into the cloud is actually a great relief for some people like that, because they're no longer having to look at some of those more mundane tasks. They're now actually being able to focus solely on IT and not have to look after everything else. And that's what you need to be mindful when you move to the cloud as well. There's that shared responsibility, and your focus should now be shifting more to the IT stuff rather than the physical around your data centre. Secure and manage should really be a business as usual activity. As I said, it's probably something you should be doing throughout the entire migration journey. But now that everything's in the cloud and you've done that migration and you've finished that step, you can really concentrate on this. You can really make it a business as usual activity, and something that you review maybe every week, maybe every month, depending on the size of your organisation and how you work. With your secure and manage stage, you should be making sure that all your procedures and all your documentation is updated. You were probably too busy during the migrate stage, but now is the time to focus on that and make sure all of that documentation and those procedures are up to date and reflect where your workloads are now sitting as well. You should again be thinking about backup and disaster recovery. You might have put an interim solution in place while you were migrating. Now is the time to actually focus and double down on that and make sure it's in place. And again, make sure all the documentation around that and the procedures are up to date and everybody knows what the new procedures are. This is also the time where you start to really focus on making sure that training is in your environment all the time. As I said at the start, you should be assessing whether your staff need training and how much training that they need and where they need it. And training now has to be a focus. That's something that is a business as usual activity. I've worked for organisations, and we probably all have, where we went on a training course once, maybe every 3 years, when a new bit of software or a new operating system came out. And that was fine back then. We went on that week-long intensive training, we certified, and we were good to go and manage our environments for the next 3 or 5 years. That doesn't work now with the cloud. The cloud unfortunately changes all the time, which is also a good thing, to be honest. But it means that you have to be on top of your learning. You have to be on top of your staff training. So you need to have a focus that, say, we're going to be looking at having a training day once a month where staff can dedicate to learning, or every 3 months we look at sending some staff off for a couple of days worth of training, or again give them time to do that. It really needs to become that business as usual activity, training your staff on how the cloud works. Now, I've spoke a lot today and I've covered off some of the high level things that I think is really important about a migration journey. What we have at Microsoft is the Microsoft Cloud Adoption Framework, or the CAF, that really covers off what I've talked about today, but in much more detail. It's an interactive document, so it's been created by Microsoft employees, Microsoft partners and customers. It's on GitHub, it's entirely open source. You can have a look at it, you can dive in at different sections that you want. You can amend it, you can change it, or you can take our best practice and our tooling kind of technologies and utilise them for your journey as well. We also have the Azure Migrate Centre, which is a great one-stop shop for people who are looking to do that migration journey. Again, it covers off a lot of what I've talked about and some of the tooling that I talked about today. It also covers off partners, and that's something that I want to call out. We probably do these data centre transformation journeys maybe once every 5 years. And sometimes we'll get a little bit stuck because it's something that we don't do all the time. If you look at some of our partners, they are dedicated in doing migrations. That's what they do. They do one migration, they move to the next customer, and they do another migration. They have great knowledge and experience around all of this. So I've got a lot of customers who have outsourced their migration project to partners, so as they can take away some of the pain that might happen with a migration, and they can take the knowledge and experience that those migration partners have leveraged with previous customers and put them into their environment and try and avoid hitting some of that pain. So again, there's some great resources around how you can get in touch with our partners and who can help you if you're on a migration journey. I want to give a big shout out to everybody that's organised this event, from the organisers to the people from behind the scenes that are currently running the sessions today, and obviously our sponsors for making this happen. It's a shame we can't all be here in Rome in person and we're having to do it virtually, but it's great to see that this event is still running and still able to help the community and share our knowledge. Now that's all I've got this morning to tell you. I've put a lot of the resources I may have talked about on this web page, so if you bookmark that web page, you can have a look and read after it once the sessions are over. My contact details are on screen. Please do reach out to me if you have any questions or any feedback. I think we have some time for questions, so hopefully we'll have some questions queued up and I'll answer them. But yeah, please do check out the website I've got on screen and reach out to me if there's any questions or if you want to connect on social media, etc. But thank you so much for tuning in today, and I hope you enjoy the rest of today's sessions as well.
Sarah? Yeah,
Hiya.
actually we have a question from Reese. Is it possible to schedule the replication, for example, to only allow it to replicate out of business hour? Is referring to replicating the virtual machine using Azure Migrate?
Yes, so Azure Migrate has quality of service built into it, so you can actually tune that down so that you're only replicating maybe out of hours, or during hours you're only replicating so much data and only taking maybe like 10% of your company's internet pipe. But built into Azure Migrate is kind of QoS, and you can kind of schedule it and you can kind of tell it when it can use the whole pipe of your internet or it can not use all of the pipe, and control it that way as well.
So another question from my side is that, sorry, given that at the beginning we have some technical problem with the audio, can you kindly say something about you at the beginning, just to present you again? Only two words, sorry. Yeah, it's because the audio was shut down for some reason, so
okay. Yeah, so if you missed the about slide for me, I'm a cloud advocate at Microsoft, and I've been in the IT industry for about 14 or more years. I've done that journey from on-prem engineer into the cloud, and that's why I'm really passionate about helping and talking to customers who are looking to do that transformation with their workloads and kind of guide them on that path as well. So yeah, that's kind of me.
Yeah, thank you very much, Sarah. So I don't have any other questions in the panel, so I think we can say thank you to all our attendees and thank you to you.
Awesome.
Thank you for joining us.
Thank you, everybody. Cheers.
Bye. Bye-bye.